Well, good morning, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, good wherever you are in the beautiful world. If you're in Australia, you're just about to go to bed. If you're in South Africa, you're just about woken up. And if you're in America, well, you're probably sleeping. So, good morning, everybody. I hope you've had a wonderful weekend. Happy Monday. And I want to welcome to Aquarius Rising KERRI Saint and Leslie Mitchell, who's been on at least twice before, right, Leslie? I think you've been here at least twice before.
Once, I think.
Once.
I can only remember one.
Well, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. How are you girls today?
Good, thank you.
Yeah, good. Good. Very good.
Good. We were just having a chuckle. before the show again because we've been being called witches again. It's like wonderful, isn't it? The minute somebody doesn't know what to call you, they'll call you a witch.
Yeah. Well,
Name
It's
calling
very
seems to be
funny.
the go-to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's
When they
interesting
go to
times.
when they resort to name calling, it's just sad. It's just rather than talk about what I spoke about, they just go to name calling, and that's. I would rather somebody go, look, I don't agree. Here's because, and have a discussion about it, which other people have had with me in the chats, and it's good. I don't mind healthy discussion and healthy debate. I don't mind that at all. But just to be attacked for your views, that's a bit sad. So
And very, very awesome views as well, because I mean everything, and this is specifically if you guys haven't seen KERRI in the last two shows we've done together, it's been about Sunday law, and is that the mark of the beast? And I mean everything is pointing in that direction actually. So all you really did was quote a lot of stuff from biblical terms anyway and scriptures, which is pointing to what's happening at these times now. And everything is kind of transpiring in that direction.
Yes.
So it's wonderful that we're clearly on the right track.
the interesting thing is that for those that watched those two shows, which were out of the norm of what I normally do, so we did it on Sunday Law, what is it, Mark of the Beast, and 2 days after I did Monday night show, Trump, in his efforts to become president again, announced to a whole consortium of Christian believers that once he gets in November, that he will give them unfettered powers they've never had before, and he's calling for compulsory Sunday church going. So that's,
Wow.
I couldn't believe it.
Wow,
2 days.
wow.
Yeah, and also I think it was a couple of days after the Pope in his Latte See called for Sunday worship. So there was a woman out speaking to the media, calling for the importance of Sunday rest and keeping the Sabbath, and it's all a part of the global warming. So they've only got to go to the mainstream news and go and check it out for themselves. So I'm glad I did it when I did it, Chantelle, because it will actually prove that a lot of what I said is evolving and going to evolve and going to increase. So
Absolutely.
I don't need to defend myself. I don't need to defend myself. I know the truth, and I know that it will just unfold automatically. And that's why I'm so confident in what I said and believe it, because I've been watching it. When I first came across this message 30 years ago, because I met it with skepticism too, and as I've watched and watched, I didn't think it would ever evolve in my lifetime. And that's the startling thing for myself. Everything I read and kept stored away is now coming out in fruition right in front of my face. So I couldn't sit back any longer and have, I know you asked questions, particular people, Chantelle, and I've heard other people ask it, and I just felt I just needed to say what I believed and leave it at that, and then people can free to choose that for themselves. That's how I feel. So yeah. Yep. But anyway.
Indeed. Interesting times, and all we have to do. I mean, hello, Caleb. Nice to see you in the. You should be sleeping anyway. Nice to see you in the chat, and he's just saying timing is perfect, and it's so true. You know, when that timing comes out, it really is divine timing. I mean, there was no ways. You know, it's just as you say, when you've said, and really, it wasn't just something you sucked out of your thumb. This is coming from a lot of scriptures, right? Ancient texts, stuff like that. And really specifically, and we know beyond a shadow of doubt, we are experiencing these times now. I mean, it's not even a question around that. I mean, it's just there's so much indication.
No. Yeah.
That anyway. Well, we shall. It's certainly interesting times, and it's nice to have you girls on the same old bouncing boat as what I am. We'll surface all tidal wave and these tsunamis, that's for sure. So good to have you anyway. Welcome, Leslie. Nice to have you here again as well. And I know your son was going to join us today, but next time you will be joining.
Next time.
So welcome. But I'm very interested to hear what you have to say again as well. Because,
I was saying we tried to rope him in, but like a typical male, and I hope he hears this. Be a bit quick, my friend. Email your mother. Keep in contact. What are you doing? Answer your mother.
Indeed.
I hope he was doing something fun.
Oh.
Well, the next time we'll rope him in because I know that we spoke about. Isn't that him there? Hey, what's his surname?
Oh, there he is. I hope he heard me. Shane, next time, be prompt. Answer your mother.
Oh my goodness! Yes, Shane, we'll have you on next time for sure. But it was really interesting because I know, Leslie, you've been on previously also speaking about the forced adoption and in my opinion, child trafficking. I don't think there's any other way to put that, that you experienced as well. And of course, KERRI, we know all about your story. But so we titled our show today, Surviving Without Justice in Australia. And man, I'd tell you something. I don't know what it is about Australia. And I love you guys, you know that. I always say I've got siblings that are there and nieces and nephews. But it's just crazy, the crap that's gone down there over the years. And it's like brutal. It's like brutal, like wild stuff, right?
Yeah. Oh, well, you know, a lot of the people, especially the POMs that say that Australia is a corrupt place and we've had terrible things happen here, they blame it on the fact that it was founded on convicts. But I would say it was mostly all the people ruling the convicts. They were just
I was going to say it's not the convicts or the people. I mean, it's the those in control. I mean, you look at what's gone down in those boys' homes.
Yes.
And I mean, it's shocking. I mean, if you guys haven't watched my interview with Joanne Breeze the other day as well, I mean, wow, truly heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And it's the parents, it's the churches, it's the governments, you know, everyone is involved. And I'm talking about royalty and stuff as well. I mean, I don't know, we might get there. We might be discussing that. I'll leave that up to Janine at some point. But very high echelon people that are all involved in this. And maybe because there was a lot of convicts that went to Australia, they thought, you know, those in control thought that they could do what the hell they wanted. and and just really had less respect for humans who were there. Oops, I see. My internet is going dodgy. So I'll leave it over to you guys.
I mean, they were excessively cruel. I mean, if anybody bothers to read the story of Ned Kelly, like, he was Irish, and he, what they did to his family, like what they did to his family, the Brits did to the Irish, and then how he ended up out here and what happened. And I read the book about his mother and about his story, and it just breaks your heart in the sense of why this family and why Ned kept rebelling and got quite violent the way he did was because of the injustice in which they were subjected to, in the colonies. So, as we're talking about injustice, I think for a very young country, Australia has got horrific history of injustices. And, we look at the stolen generation. We look at what happened to the Indigenous Australians here. And then we look at the forgotten Australians, like after the war, that, all the young people were sent out here and they're under parental permission. But the parents were deceived as well. When they all came, the children stayed in all the orphanages and children were put to work and horrifically abused. And then we've got our group is more adoption. So it's hard to got so much trauma going on for it. It's terrific. So, and in reality, what happened to each and every person that was traumatized, none of them have received the justice which they deserve. We had the Royal Commission to Social Abuse in this country, and there was 50,000 submissions, or 40,000 just wrote that only could have the capacity to take a couple of them. So
just hang on a sec. I just
the came out from England and stuff.
I just want to find out, is it KERRI's internet or is it my internet? Someone in the chat, if you can just let us know. Can you guys hear KERRI fine? Because it's very broken for me, but it's possible. Okay, so KERRI, KERRI, I don't know if you can hear. She seems to have frozen there. I think KERRI is on a freeze mode. They obviously don't want. Okay.
Am I right?
There you are. Okay, you were very wonky there. For the last conversation you had. I just want to make sure that your internet is fine again.
Yep. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Can you hear you now?
Can you hear me okay? Yeah?
Yes.
We've had some very bad storms here, very bad weather, so I'm not surprised. So we'll see how we go. Yeah. So what I was just saying is that we've had a horrific history of abuse to children, in particular, in this country. And I was saying that we had a Royal Commission into sexual abuse, particularly by clergy and children in institutions. And I remember there was something like 40,000 submissions that originally came in for that, but they only kind of took on board a couple of thousand of those.
But it's been worldwide,
and, Australia's... Hey? What was that, Leslie?
It's been worldwide.
Oh, definitely. But we're just talking about Australia. Yeah. The sexual abuse in Australia. Like when you think 40,000 victims in that era of, the Forgotten Australians, and that was just after the war, up in I think going into late 1950s, early 1960s, something like that. So... and most of it's the same players too. It's the same perpetrators. It's the same players in the whole system, and it's people that are in positions of authority and supposedly, you know, positions to take care of the most vulnerable and the poor, when those people have been taken advantage of. And that's a terrible indictment on Australia. But yes, I admit the other world. I'm not authority on what happens around the other world. I know what happened in my own backyard, and I figure that's huge, because, you know, as Leslie knows, I speak with victims all across Australia, and males and females, and also the mothers and fathers affected by forced adoption. And it's quite an horrific thing that happened, and I don't think people quite comprehend the enormity of it. When I talk about forced adoption or adoption, people assume that we're talking about what adoption looks like today, where, you know, often children are very much integrated into the process. We're talking about forced adoption is between the 1950s and the 1940s to 1980s, where mothers were held against their will and drugged and held down in beds and lied to, and their human rights were violated, the baby's human rights were violated, and you know, a whole heap of children weren't screened, the adoptive parents weren't screened for where the children went to. Children were being sold for money under the table. There was corrupt doctors, there were corrupt lawyers, there were corrupt politicians, there were corrupt, what do you call them, that worked in the matrons, that worked in the hospitals. They were corrupt and they were cruel.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do tonight is talk about those things. So Leslie, before I start, when I started lobbying back in, particularly on a Senate inquiry in 2004 and 5, a lot of the victims got together and started lobbying towards a Senate inquiry. And at that stage, the mothers had no clue of the enormity of the trauma that the babies, what they experienced. They were told that their baby would have a better life and that they would be better off without them. And the mothers had experienced a lot of trauma in the institutions and within the hospitals and felt they had no voice. There were very few that could actually really fight back or try to fight back. And it wasn't until the Senate inquiry where mums like Leslie and myself, as an adoptee, we all started to sitting across from each other in the sense of really hearing each other out. I know there were many stories I was hearing for the first time where mums were even hauled off to prison for a short period of time, and some mums were had electric shock treatment whilst pregnant, and then, you know, also being held against their will and being forced to work in the laundromats here in Australia. So once, you know, that dialogue really opened up, adoptees then began to understand that they weren't just given up, right? They weren't just, I don't want you, you're of no value to me. And though at the time, because they called it former forced adoptions, many adoptees didn't have a clue that they could get involved in the inquiry, because we had been told we were given away. So it wasn't until the Senate inquiry was nearly over that adoptees began to realise the truth of the matter. And so there were only a few like myself, because I had a long relationship with my mum, and she had told me how I'd been taken from her, that I knew that I could get involved in the inquiry. And it was there in this inquiry that I divulged the abuses that adoptees suffered and myself. So mums were hearing about abuses for the first time and what their child would have been subjected to or possibly subjected to. And up until that stage, a lot of relationships where the mother and particularly the child had a reunion or tried to have a reunion, neither side worked well at all, because both were coming in with a false view of what the other experienced. So it wasn't until the Senate inquiry that the mum had the proof to go, look, I'm not just saying it. There are hundreds of mothers saying the same thing, because many adoptees didn't believe their mums when they first met them and the mum's trying to tell them. And vice versa, where the adoptee was saying I was abused, the mum's going, no, that couldn't possibly have happened. And so the mums were starting to get and understand that adoptees had suffered as well. So out of that process came, it was very hard. And I'm going to tell you, it's not easy. And that's what we'll talk about tonight. The process to get to where we are today, well, it's been 11 years since the federal apology to victims of former forced adoptions. That's coming up on the 21st of March, which is this month. It's been really hard work, and we had a number of submissions, recommendations, and only a handful of those recommendations have been followed through with, and not even satisfactorily. So, and this is our problem, is that, so... You want to say anything, Leslie? Let me keep.
Yes, I do. Before we could understand the truth of it, we had to understand the lies that we'd all been told.
Yeah.
So it's a process.
I think from where I'm sitting, you look at this and just the lies in itself. Just that lie, the amount of emotional trauma that has caused people, both parents as well as children, over the years. I mean, I'm a healer, right? I work with this stuff daily. So for me, it's absolutely, that's the first thing, because the trauma that has been caused just through those lies has broken down so much trust in both kids. And because they believed, like you, KERRI, I mean, they believed, you believed that your mother was dead and that she had you when she was 16. I mean, there must be countless other people that have gone through stuff like that. And then perchance you come to find out years later that she was 36 and she was certainly alive and well, right? And you went through all of this as a child. I mean, it destroyed so much of who you were and are, right? That first has got to be fixed. So that's the first step that one has to reconcile. And that in itself is a massive process. So they've really done so much damage, over the years. And then, of course, there's the abuse. There's the trauma that goes along with that as well. So the trust has got to be built. And let's hope more and more people start finding, more parents and children actually start finding their way back together again, because that's very important.
Yeah. I had been told that Shane was most likely... Sorry, KERRI?
It's gone, Leslie. No,
I was told in the hospital that Shane would most likely... Shane wasn't his name at the time, but he would most likely never get to leave the hospital. And that's all I was ever told. So I didn't know if he was alive or not. So when he found me, it was a real shock. Like KERRI with her mother, That's pretty hard to deal with.
So you spent all that time believing your son had probably died.
Yeah,
because that's what they told you.
44
and
years.
the trauma.
Yeah.
And then again, it's kind of like, when from what I'm understanding, he contacted you, right? Am I right with that, Leslie? Okay, so when he found you and he made contact with you, the shock, I mean, just that mental, emotional shock of, oh my God, my child has been around all this time. I mean, I can imagine for you as a mother, that must have been quite horrific, just to realize that he's been here all the time.
Yeah.
And how different things could have been had you known, right?
But I was relieved that he was alive. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow.
But there's a lot of anger.
Yeah, absolutely. believe it.
For those that don't know, Shane is actually in the comment section. So if you want to ask him a question while we're talking, that's fine. So Shane is actually Lesley's son, who was taken from her at his birth. And we had tried to have Shane on with us, but he was a naughty little boy and didn't answer his mother's phone.
He did not contact his mother.
So Shane, we seriously want you on, so we know we'll get you here. So now I just wanted to answer Joyful Janine's question. She asked about the electric shock treatment. Did it cause a miscarriage? In the woman that I particularly know that gave evidence at the Senate inquiry, because I was sitting a few feet from her when she told this to the senators, she told her story. I just about lost it. But her son, who she was pregnant with, who also suffered the electric shock treatment in the womb, also gave evidence. And he had suffered suicidal ideation from as far as he could remember. It had affected him so much. Like the fact that he found his mother eventually probably kept him alive, but the both of them were pretty traumatically affected by this horrible trauma inflicted upon them. It's just dreadful. So yeah. So anyway,
absolutely.
So
I'm just looking at some of Shane's comments here as well, like just the last two. Yeah, figure out the truth from being groomed to think our trauma never existed, because we know that a child from when it's in the womb, right, knows what's going on. I'm sorry, it does. That baby knows what's going on. It knows, and I also know this through the work I've done with people over the years. The minute that child is in the womb, it grows with the mother. It takes on those emotions. It hears what's going on outside. And it's like you were saying, KERRI, as well. You know, when you were doing your healing work, it was like, as a baby, you did not want to come out because you knew you were going to be given away. That fear of not being with your mother is huge. I mean, that abandonment, that rejection that a child suffers even before the child is born is massive. And that carries on throughout the years that continue. And yeah, I'm just looking at Shane's comment again. My adoptive mother, also a mother of forced adoption, made me sign a no contact veto on the bonnet of the car in the driveway on my 16th birthday.
That was legal, apparently.
Yeah. So what happened was in 1991, we had set up, the government allowed us to have a contact register. And what it was, the mothers could write in and then like sort of fill out a form saying that she wanted to have contact with the child and give as much information as possible. And then if the child made contact with the department, they would link them both up. But there was a veto paper, and unfortunately we found out there were 2,000 adoptive parents signed those veto papers on behalf of their child when their child didn't even know those veto papers had been submitted. So that was fraud, because the adoptive parent obviously didn't want their adopted child to have any contact with their biological mother. So they forged their signatures and sent them into the department.
Sorry, I'm just putting this up because Rise and Shine is saying she can't see any of Shane's comments. So I'm just going to put them up as we...
Okay, all right.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. So what Shane is referring to is a no contact veto paper, and that lasted. And when you had a veto on you, if Lesley had, then she would have been informed that her son didn't want contact.
No, right? I wasn't. I was told nothing.
Okay, so normally that's what would happen, and what they would tell you is that if you try to make contact, it was a 7-year jail term, and it was a fine of thousands of dollars if you did.
That is absolutely atrocious.
Yeah.
I mean, that is atrocious. Yeah, again, Shane said, I'm in a constant cycle of self-harm. And I believe that, you know.
Yeah.
I believe that that would be a cycle of self-harm. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So so having our mums, it was, look, the type of brainwashing that happened to our mums was told that they would be pathetic parents, they weren't good enough, and that we would go off and have wonderful lives, and that we would be better off without them, right? And then as the child, we were told that we were to be grateful, and that we couldn't say one word about how we felt about being adopted. So that's when he talks about, you know, basically having what would we say, having this constant nullification of your trauma, and that you were never allowed to express it, and it was never recognized. And it wasn't until the Senate inquiry, which was 12 years ago, that the truth of what happened to adoptees started to come to the surface. It only started back then. And it was in 2012-13 when the Australian Institute of Family Studies report did a survey of 832 adoptees got involved in that survey, which is the biggest survey in Australia of adopted people. That is when the truth of the harm to adoptees became very evident. And that was when they found out that 75% of the respondents were suffering from a moderate to severe mental health disorder at the time of doing the survey. And that was very telling. And they said that didn't even matter. They sort of said, even if they went to what was a good home where they weren't abused like myself, these adoptees were still suffering severe mental health disorders, the same as where I was at for being abused. So once that came out in 2012, that's when a lot of what we were saying really started to resonate. Really, they kind of validated, and they started to respond to the things that we were telling them, like, you know, the government and that, like, and that we really needed to have action. And Shane would say it, and Leslie too, was that there needed to be full action on the type of counselling and support that was required. And unfortunately, when they set up what we call the post-adoption resource service, they weren't trauma informed around forced adoption. They were counsellors, but there was no, and Shane will say this because I can't wait till Shane comes on to tell you the work he's done since he's been speaking out, but there was no training program. There was nothing in the university program, psychology and counselling or anything based around adoption and the trauma that is associated with it. So we've got mothers who had spent 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years carrying a horrendous amount of trauma and going off to counselling. And I'm sorry, but it was traumatizing within itself, because a lot of the counsellors had no concept of what the mothers experienced and knew how to respond to it. So they were re-traumatizing the mothers. And then adoptees, the same thing was happening. Adoptees were being traumatized by going to counselling because there just wasn't so there was no training, there was no understanding in the universities and stuff. There may have been some people doing it there, but when you do social work or something, you have so many modules. Well, you know, you've got a list of things that you learn at uni on, you know, on trauma and everything else. You try and find anything on adoption, it's the smallest little bit of information, and then it's watered down. It's not the truth of what really happened. And so you walk out of university, say, oh, well, I'm a counsellor or a social worker or a psychologist, and you think you're going to be able to go out there and help people, and you just don't have the information. And that's where voices like Leslie's and Shane's and myself and other adoptees became imperative to this discussion with government, and became imperative in discussions with counsellors and doctors and so on. They're valuable. They're enormously valuable, and particularly for any other child that was adopted after us in this era, this day and time. was the information that we hold as a lived experience over our lifetime is invaluable to those counsellors and invaluable to those adoptive parents and to the adoptees. Yeah, this
Caleb.
Shane will talk to you about what he's been doing about education. I can't tell you because I don't know the ins and outs of it. You'll have to tell you directly.
He set up a curriculum somewhere. So when he comes on, we'll get him to talk about it, because he's, even though, like myself, he suffered a lot of trauma, he's been very active and proactive in what he feels would be best to help other people. And that's what I think is really great about Shane's. And you go on, Leslie.
Shane's a HSP, highly sensitive person, and he picks up on everything. You know, even he's picked up on things from the womb. You know, he knows I was talking to him and everything.
So we had the Senate inquiry, and we had the when it came to Queensland, where Leslie and I live, the Queensland government called in stakeholder groups like my own and wanted to discuss the wording of the Queensland apology, what that would look like, because even though the Queensland government was going to apologise, there were things they did not want to say at all, and they made sure they had their lawyers in the room to ensure that they were not going to leave themselves open to being sued. So though they were giving an apology, it was a very well-crafted apology that they wanted to give us. And that, to me, was galling. That, to me, it really put a fire in my belly. And so I was invited to a meeting where there was a large number of people in there, stakeholders, lawyers, and I had gone in prepared, and I want to read out the dot points that I had, which we can open up a discussion based on some of these dot points. So I sat there and I listened to a lot of the mums talking about their trauma, and the lawyers were really attentive to that and really wanting to make sure that they put in that the mothers were traumatized by having their baby stolen from them and other things. And I listened for quite a lengthy time, and nothing was being referred to about the baby suffering trauma. I had gone and prepared, because what I had done is I had gone into the Senate inquiry, the book that comes out with all the findings. And what I had done is I had taken the report and I just flipped the sentences around. So where they had that the mother was traumatized from having her baby stolen, I put the baby was traumatized. So I put my hand up at one stage and I said, could I please read something out? And they said, sure. And so I told them where I got it from, and in it I had the page number. So here's some of the things that happened to the babies. All right, so babies being forced back down the birth canal to deliberately delay the birthing process, and as it inconvenienced doctors to be given birth at that time. So the doctors were playing golf, or they were out socializing, and they would get a call from the hospital that one of the young girls was having a baby. So we had mothers recounting, and this is in the Senate report, that the baby was deliberately pushed back down the birth canal. Babies being exposed to high levels of drugs to slow the birthing process down.
Yep.
Babies used as collateral on pain of death for forced consent. Babies being left for months in cold hospital nursery wards waiting to be adopted. Babies being placed in institutions even though their mother wanted them and was willing and able to take them. Babies not being placed for adoption and being left in the hospital for long periods. In one case I knew of was 2 years. Babies, and that baby ended up being adopted by a lady that ran an orphanage. So she ended up in an orphanage, but the woman ended up adopting her. Babies being denied their mother's first touch. Babies forcibly removed using forceps. Babies being denied breast milk, important for immunity. babies forcibly denied contact with their mothers, babies being removed from the hospital away from the mothers without consent, babies being taken out of the state in which they were born, and they often did that so that the mothers couldn't find them or vice versa, babies being wrenched from mothers' arms, medical treatment of babies without mother's consent, medical treatment being denied to the baby causing death, unborn babies exposed to distress and trauma of their mothers prior to, during and after birth, babies dying at birth or stillborn and not provided with proper burial resulting in unmarked graves, babies being swapped to replace a stillborn baby, babies left distressed and crying but not allowed to be touched, soothed or comforted by their mothers. So when I finished reading that out, and the room was dead quiet, you could actually hear people crying. And I looked up and I said, so now, do you think we can put the word trauma and mother and baby in the same sentence, please? And at that stage, they had to adjourn the meeting because people couldn't get themselves together. So they adjourned it for 10 minutes and came back in. And that's when, in our Queensland apology, we actually got the word trauma and adoptee and mother in the same sentence. If I had not been sitting in that room, that's not what would have happened.
Do you think they are deliberately ignorant, or just, do you think people were deliberately turning a blind eye to these atrocities, or just were not made aware over time?
No, they knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was, why would it need to be secret, all done in secret, if they thought it was okay? If they thought that what they were doing was okay, why did it all need to be hush-hush and secret coding? And the fact that they changed babies' birth certificates, they changed the name of the mother, they lied about the date of the birth of the baby. There was so much that they did that was wrong.
Especially so the mother could never find that baby.
Yeah.
And it really is, it's really about, you know, the way I see it. I mean, whether these people who carrying through, whether it was orders or just they themselves were, I don't know, must have been programmed on some level. Because how do you do that to a mother and a child? I mean, I cannot for a second imagine being a nurse or a doctor or a whatever and inflicting that trauma upon a mother and a child. How do you consciously, knowingly do that, and you go through life every day without realizing that? So, you know, for me, that is the deliberate trauma creation. Something, whoever initiated this process knew exactly what they were doing when it came to separating the mothers and the children, because they knew exactly what type of trauma they were creating. And I mean, it's like cutting off the arm, right? Or whatever it is, that or the hand. If you think about them holding hands, it was like literally cutting off that connection. And now you go there and you go there. How do they expect there to be peace and joy in either one's life? And they were doing it by the thousands. There were thousands and thousands of young women and babies who were being treated in this manner. It's atrocious.
They estimate 250,000, but they can't be, they're only guessing in the sense because they know there were many illegal adoptions and that they weren't registered. So we at least know for definite 150,000 plus. Then they sort of calculate at least 250. So it's more. It's astronomical.
And then there's 250,000 mothers and 250,000 fathers.
And 250,000 adoptees.
Yeah. There's just so many people.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is that there were people that actually gave evidence that were alive at the time and were even involved in it, and it varied from who was interviewed. Because when I read the submissions, because they would come up on the government site and you could read them before you actually went to the hearing, and you knew who was going to give evidence, and there were social workers and the matrons and nurses. Some of them gave evidence, and some of them were just callous. They were just like holding ground. It didn't matter what the mothers said or the adoptees said or what fathers said. Mm-hmm. They held ground that this was a right thing to do and that they were justified to do it because these were loose women, you know. And I, like for me, sitting there and knowing what I went through as a child and hearing these women, ex-matrons, go on about, well, those children would have just been abused anyway. They were very lucky to go off to loving homes, and we ensured that they went to loving homes. Well, that was a lie. It was completely made up lies. And then you'd have doctors that would say they felt they had no power to do anything because the matrons ruled the hospitals. So a lot of the young doctors who could see the horrific stuff that was happening felt they had no power to say anything. And then there was the much older doctors, because you remember we come from a society where back then, where when you're in a position of authority, you never questioned it back then. So even the older doctors who were even in the hospitals, they would collude with the matrons, and there'd be deals going on for these babies. There'd be money exchanging hands for these babies. And positions of power for these babies. And then we had, I remember it was a fellow that he was an ambulance driver, and he gave evidence as well. And he said he was racked with pain and guilt all his life because he would have to drive not just one young mother to the hospital, but he would often take a number of them at once. And he said they would be crying and so upset, and he felt so disempowered to be able to say anything or do anything. So it's not even just the mums and the adoptees and the dads. There were these other people, like the cleaners in the hospitals, or the underlings, the young nurses, or the young doctors, or the younger nuns in the laundries where these mothers worked. They all felt it was wrong, but nobody seemed to have the ability to rise up against it. So if they were powerless, this is the bit I get, like, it's like, well, if the woman wanted to keep a baby, why did she just fight hard enough? And I'm sure Lesley's heard that a dozen times. Well, could you imagine that there's a doctor in the hospital that can't fight for this mother? There's an ambulance officer that can't fight for this mother, right? There were people around that felt powerless. So how could the mum in such a vulnerable situation be able to fight back against this system?
Yeah. It wasn't just one person. It was a whole consolidated effort.
Right, that's what I was about to say. It's not just one or two people that the mum was up against. It's an entire system, like everything. And this is what I've noticed. And I'm not saying it's not like this anywhere else, right? But this for me has been abundantly clear since dealing with survivors and overcomers from Australia. No matter what it is, like when we're looking at this whole adoptive system now, it's been so rigged for so long. We were looking at the abuse of young boys being taken from their homes. Their parents might have been poor, or they might have been naughty, and going into these boys' homes. This entire thing. I mean, every man I spoke to that was in one of these boys' homes said to me, there was not one adult in that entire home that was on their side. All of them were involved. Then they'd get trafficked to these nightclubs where the most horrible atrocities would take place. They were literally MK Ultra. It was an open thing that MK Ultra was happening in these boys' homes. I mean, they were rigged for that purpose. And I mean, I see the same thing here. I mean, I don't want to say, okay, mostly the other people I've spoken to is Americans, right? And some Brits as well. it was never as overt as what it is or has been in Australia. There they were doing it underground and in dodgy places, like, you know, underneath the churches and stuff like that. This was like just, as we say in Afrikaans, open bloot, out in the open, you know, open for everyone to see. It was like the norm there. And that's what I find so disturbing about these situations, and especially with Australia, is because it was so damn rigged and everyone was involved.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll tell you a story about a friend of mine, and I'm sure she won't mind me mentioning the story without the name. She had a baby not long after I had Shane. I didn't know her then. And she went to her doctor for her final visit, final checkup, and he had the paperwork there, and he turned it around and he pushed it across the desk and gave her a pen, and he said, "You don't need to sign that." And she looked at him and she, you know, absorbed what he just said, and she ended up keeping her baby, took him home to a caravan park.
Wow.
No problems. You just need one person on your side.
That's it. Just one person who will actually stand up for you.
Yeah.
And most, I'm astounded as well that so few parents stood up for their children, for their daughters. And I mean, it's not, I mean, and we've spoken about this, it's not just the mothers, but the fathers as well. I mean, the fathers, especially if they were young, 16 or 18 or whatever, they were even more powerless. They did not have a say at all. And yet so little emphasis or spotlight, if you will, is shone on how the men suffered in these times as well, because we forget that men suffer deeply, and they too lost their children, you know. It's shocking.
I think there was pressure on our parents, my mum. Mum has said to me only about 2 years ago, she said, if she had known how resilient our family would have become, she would have fought harder.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sure there was manipulation. I'm sure there must have been manipulation from the authorities to the parents as well. There must have been manipulation.
There's if anybody's interested, there's a doco series on Netflix at the moment called The Program. And I really believe people should check it out, and it will help them to understand how a system gets rigged. And it's not until, so it's a series, so I can't remember how many's in it, but near the end of the series, because it's about schools that were set up for wayward sort of kids, and the corruption that went on, and how the children thought that their parents knew what was happening to them, but they didn't have any idea. And it exposes how the parents were also groomed, in a sense, and kept in the dark, and the damage done to these young people who some of them were horrifically abused. So check it out. It's done by a victim or a survivor, a number of survivors of it, and it's brilliantly done. But I was not surprised when they got to the last sort of part of it, where they talked about that there are schools still existing today like that just for adoptees. And so I was aghast, because I can imagine how an adopted person feels, feeling rejected and dejected and all the trauma. And then because they're acting out, the parents are not getting the help they need. So they send their children off to what they're supposed to be really good boarding schools, but for kids with problems. And then the kids going off there, and then it's a cult. The abuse, there's no oversight like there was an adoption. There was no oversight when we were adopted to make sure everything was ethical and above board and checks and balances. The same thing happens today, particularly in America, in these schools. And the children are being horrifically abused. So I could just imagine what is happening to some of these adoptees. I actually came across some research when I writing to ministers and stuff, and I come out, there was some, and I found some statistics on America with their adoptees, and it says 60 to 85% of teens at Coldwater Canyon Center for Personal Development are adopted. That is 30 to 40 times the norm. The center is a private acute care psychiatric hospital school in Southern California. And then the 50 to 70% of the teens at the Haven in New Trier Township, Illinois, are adopted. That is 25 to 30 times the norm. The Haven is a resource center for street kids. So what does that tell you? Like, it says studies show an average of 25 to 35% of the young people in residential treatment centers are adoptees. This is 17 times the norm. So that come from studies from over in the States. So they're still sticking these kids in these type school orphanage things, and the parents, you just check it out. Like, before our next interview, if people want to check it out, we can have this discussion with Shane, and it will show that people who worked there were powerless to stop what was happening to these kids, and about the money that was exchanging hands and who got it, and no justice. There's been no justice for what's happened there. And out of the one school alone where these young girl, well, they're in their 30s, I think, the girls that are doing the documentary, they were asked how many of those that they knew had committed suicide, and they said 40 young children who went to that school in the time period they were there committed suicide.
That is unfreaking believable.
Yeah,
for young children. Wow.
Yeah, well, so they got to high school age. They were made to stay there until they went through the program. I can't explain it well enough, but the show does. And some kids were there for years, and the school was supposed to be accredited for high school, and none of it was. So even though some kids decided to knuckle down and cop the torture and the abuse and go through this program, even after 3 years, they got out with what they thought was a high school diploma, and it wasn't. It was toilet paper, and it just wrecked. So kids that needed to go off to college had nothing to back them up. But it will give you a picture of how systemically things can happen and how powerless and the power that is brought with it. And that's very much like adoption in itself, that a whole narrative and a whole picture and the power behind it has made many of the victims silenced and unable to say anything, and certainly unable to get the help that they deserve. I mean, a lot of what we've had is tokenism, wouldn't you think, Leslie?
Yeah, it's very telling that no one's been held accountable. No one I know.
I was actually about to ask that now. Through all of this stuff, have there been those? I mean, okay, I can understand that this is going back years and years now. So many of the people in authoritative positions would no longer be there. But at what point, I mean, you know, if there's apologies being given in Queensland for trauma, the trauma caused to adoptees, as well as the parent, the mother and child, right? Who is being held accountable? Or is it just, sorry, we didn't know any better? But you see, this is what I'm saying. Where is the accountability? Because if somebody's going to apologize, it doesn't help that my second cousin 3 times removed apologizes for my atrocities that I committed, right? There's got to be somebody that has actually instilled these laws, if you will, or procedures, right, there has got to be some, it's like after apartheid, there was something in South Africa called the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, where for many years the elders were sitting on these committees, and the perpetrators of apartheid were brought to justice. They were absolutely brought before this commission, and they were made to apologize and be accountable for their actions. And a lot of these disgusting military units and prisons, etc., the ones in charge were literally brought to justice. It did. I mean, I'm not saying it was the only solution, but it certainly gave a lot of healing to a lot of people. It certainly wasn't the solution for everything. I'm going to absolutely say that. But there has to be, in order for healing to occur, there has to be some kind of accountability, where you actually, and I'm not saying everyone has to now sit in front of a council, but where in these particular situations where the country has decided that the government has to actually be accountable and pay reparations of some sort or the other, offer experts healing, offer them something. I mean, I'm not, I can't say what exactly it has to be that they've got to offer, but these things can be discussed amongst a lot of people who are involved. But really, that's where it begins, is when people are actually held accountable. You can actually say what needs to be said, basically, and that's where it begins. But unless that happens, I don't see much hope, and I'm going to be pretty honest, of healing taking place. And I think it's wonderful. I mean, KERRI, especially what you've been doing in terms of, bringing the stuff out. But it has to, there has to be some form of accountability. It really does.
One of the biggest child traffickers in America ever, Georgia Tan, died without ever being held accountable for anything.
Just say her name again, Leslie.
Georgia Tan.
So people want to Google Georgia Tan.
Georgia Tan. How do we spell that? Let me put it in the chat.
She was called George. So that's how you spell it.
Georgia, as in
Georgia.
George with an A.
Georgia.
Georgia. T-A-N. Tan.
Yeah, double N.
Double N.
She was pure evil.
Yeah, no, it usually is when that sort of thing.
Yeah. So in Queensland, I took Leslie in with me to meet the minister with another mum who had her child taken.
Oh, that's about 4 ministers ago, KERRI.
Oh, yeah, I should say. We go through them like, I don't know, bras. I don't know. So, yeah, there was 4 of us. We went in to see the Minister of Child Safety at the time. And we brought up a number of issues, and that was redress, we call it, redress, and it was part of the recommendations made the Senate inquiry. And there was absolute, nope, never going to happen. And so Victoria, who had its own inquiry, so we had the federal inquiry, and it had its own inquiry. Leslie, how about you tell them about the enormous amount of money that it's been offered to the mothers?
Oh, so my baby and everyone else's baby is worth $30,000 if you jump through the hoops. That's what they've put on it.
That's like a month's rental.
Yeah. So that's what a life is worth.
And that's not offered to the adoptee. That's only offered to the mother.
Yeah.
Adoptees aren't offered anything. $30,000. That's their redress.
And what is their explanation as to why it's not $300,000?
Can't afford it.
No,
you know why? You know why they don't want to pay redress to every person, every victim of forced adoption? Australia would go broke because there are so many of them.
I was going to say every second person would be claiming on that, because that's how atrocious the system has been.
The kids in care, the ones that were abused in the orphanages, what we call the forgotten Australians, I think they were initially offered anything between $130,000 and $190,000. But there's definitely, it was up there. I think the average was about $60,000 to $90,000. And it was based on how long you were in the institution for, not the abuse. But because the numbers were lower, they could offer that amount of money. But because there's this enormous amount of victims in forced adoption, the government, I think, is absolutely freaking out about the whole thing and the amount of money that would be paid out. I think I've
always said it's bigger than Ben-Hur.
Yeah. Someone sat down and wrote it out. I worked it out. It was like $2 something a person once. Where was that? Victoria or New South Wales sat down. Someone sat down and worked it out. Once they announced, we're going to give a certain million for the victims, and then someone sat it down based on all the victims, the amount of victims in that state, would work out at $2 per person. Once it's divvied up and split up.
They treat us like idiots.
So, most of the victims understand that, and nothing could replace the child or the mother or the life in which they destroyed, no amount of money. But the crueling factor in this is they can't even give us the resources and the services in lieu of compensation. So lives that have been destroyed, we're talking about proper trauma counselling, help with reunions, changing birth certificates back, mental health support, could be the fact that someone's homeless and drug addicted. Like, they can't even give the services. And many of the victims that were interviewed through the Senate inquiry said, look, we prefer the services. At the end of the day, that's what we want. But so the government took that and ran with it and said, great, we don't have to pay them any money. But they've also reneged on the services part.
They're waiting for the mothers to be unalive.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm just thinking, exactly that same thing, because soon, this wave of mothers is not going to be on the earth plane anymore. So they'll have less to contend with. I think there should be, most important is that they offer services with really highly qualified, compassionate human beings. And in my opinion, probably women and men that have been through the system, that know it, not someone that's just coming in there because they've been appointed by the government. So someone, again, it's like somebody that has experienced this, because that's how you really know what the person has been through, is when you actually appoint qualified people who've experienced this type of abuse, and now they are the ones that are actually offering the counselling, the mental health, the emotional support, whatever it is.
KERRI, can I tell the story about the WA inquiry? Who's in charge of it?
Go for it. Of course you can. Is that what you like?
An adoptive parent.
Wow. An adoptive parent. So one that was adopted, or one that actually had her baby removed?
No.
So adopted the child.
They adopted a child.
No head
He's in charge of our WA inquiry. How independent is that?
What
a conflict of interest.
Total conflict of interest.
Yeah. And he's been called out on it and denied everything. just...
Well, it just shows you how corrupt they still are. You know, the way I see it, the minute you start lying and the minute you start gaslighting and the minute you start twisting and manipulating things, you should not be there to begin with. You know, people must be truthful and they must own their shit. It's that simple to me, you know. The truth sets you free. So, really.
So yeah, you're a victim of forced adoption, and you go and you're sitting in a chair and you're looking up at the committee that's sitting there ready to hear your story, and the chairperson is an adoptive parent. Like, we actually wrote in, many of us, we did a bit of petition and wrote in, and we demanded for her to step down, and they absolutely refused.
Yeah, your son Shane, Leslie, saying, I need weekly psychological support, but only get 10 a year. I mean, that's less than 1 a month.
Yes.
It's disgusting.
You get, I mean, I know, I mean, I'm someone who works with people who are traumatized and very often not as traumatized as this. And oops, yeah, yes, Joyful Janine, own your shite.
Shane said the chairman blocked him. Shane often gets blocked by people. Your mother did too, so you know the apple didn't fall far from the tree, because Leslie and I often work together and collude together, and we'll hit up a politician, and Leslie gets shut out real quick, don't you, Leslie? I reckon we had a discussion about it. I said, I bet you our names are floating around all the politicians with this big X mark beside our names. So it's like, don't talk to them, you know. So,
block him.
Yeah. we had a politician pushing for it was to do with birth certificates and to do with transgender children being able to change their sex on birth certificates. And it was all on Facebook, on a Facebook page. And Leslie and I, because Leslie makes me aware, and we get on there and we're typing away and go, well, can you fight for us too, you know? And of course, this woman got very upset with us, and we were being pretty nice, like just telling our truth.
We were asking questions that should have been easy to answer.
So Leslie lets me know. She says, I've been blocked. I go, what do you mean? So what we do, a tag team. So then I'd go in there and start writing and saying stuff.
My brother goes in, and then Shane goes in. We're all blocked.
And then they're accusing me of having different Facebook aliases and thinking that I'm maybe Shane or whatever. And I go, no. I said, it's just me. I said, this is the victims. Like, we're not all one person.
She accused us of bullying her.
Yeah,
I've got screenshots of the whole episode, and there was no bullying.
Yeah.
It was just questions she didn't want to answer.
Isn't it? I mean, isn't this just, again, look at that gaslighting. I'm sorry, that's what gaslighting is to me, you know, and it's the manipulation, the lies, you know. The minute you've got to start telling lies and the minute you've got to start twisting something, then that's when the trouble begins.
The funniest thing was I actually got to have a phone discussion with this politician, and she was very curt on the phone to me, and she was going, you just don't understand. I'm really fighting for this poor little girl, a constituent's daughter, who is very upset because she wants her truth. She wants to identify as who she really is, right? This little child. This is what. And I'm going, hey, lady, are you serious? Like, do you realize I'm fighting? You know, I'm like, what was I? Early 50s, right? Fighting for the years of abuse and trauma that we've carried, that nobody is speaking up for us. Like, this little child isn't being beaten and abused. Like, you know.
She just wants to be called a sheep or a fur bunny or something, and they're not allowing her to.
And meanwhile, Shane's fighting for his life and to stay alive.
Yeah.
And we're saying, look, you know, these are the aspects to do with adoption and birth certificates. Could you please speak up about that in the process? And she was saying, no, go away. You're abusing and harassing me. I just want to fight for this poor little girl or boy. And I'm going, you serious?
It shows you, you know, when it's got it, when that's their agenda, they are so programmed and they are so bought and owned by this nefarious,
They don't
satanic
want to understand because it's so horrific.
Yeah, I agree. But to me, it's almost like part of their programming. They program to not see that. It's like if you work for the New World Order, you are programmed in a certain way. It's like you can't even open your consciousness to stuff like this. It's like crazy for me to see that, any normal human being who has not had any kind of pre-programmed nonsense will understand and have compassion for what you guys have been through. That's normal. It's as human beings we have that. But this lot, they handled, they programmed, they owned, they're not allowed to, they can't, they're incompetent when it comes to anything that is about compassion and emotion. They have no compassion. It's not part of.
When we went in to see the minister, how far ago? 4 ministers ago. In the last 2 years, I think we've gone through 4 ministers in the department, but the one I took Leslie in to see, after we told her about, the abuses that I had suffered and others, the other mum that was there, the horrific trauma she had, and Leslie, and I had another adoptee that runs a big government-funded service. So he's in the know. And at the end of the day, she's going, there'll be no redress or compensation. But the funniest part was you heard her say, the government's a slow-moving wheel, KERRI. I don't think I can achieve this while I'm here. And then it was, I'm in power, but I don't have any. So basically, she was letting me know that she wasn't running the show. She was just there as a figurehead to do the bidding of whoever was in control over her, because she wasn't passionate. She felt as if she was telling us that there's nothing I can do. My hands are tied. I'm just here to kind of like nod my head and sign some papers and not create any waves. It's all too hard, or I'm going to be beating my head up against the boss who's telling me that this is not the agenda that we're going to address. But I heard I'm in power, but I don't have any.
Exactly. I want to just comment on your comment here, Shane. I never had any non-adopted people comment or engage in my post ever, not even clear. And and I'm going to tell you why that is, from my opinion as well, is again because the average person has no idea that this has been going on. Where we come from, adopted kids usually have lost their parents, or their parents didn't want them. That's kind of like what the general public understands. So yes, and that's what KERRI and you, Leslie, are saying. Is that adoptees should be grateful for this beautiful home that they've been given, right? And that's why it's so important to actually speak up about this stuff and share this information and this knowledge, because the average person thinks, oh, well, they've been adopted. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, only because I've been a healer for many years and I've worked with many kids who've been adopted. And let me tell you, some of them are trust fund babies. They don't even know what the word abuse means. But they have issues around abandonment and rejection that are so deeply ingrained that they are often cover it up with other stuff, right? And that, for me, has been something that I've looked into over the years. But that's only because I came across so much of it in my career. And I realized something is not right. And obviously, KERRI, and we started speaking about this, that's when you unfolded a whole lot more layers. And of course, then seeing how many kids in the system have been adopted.
There's layers and layers.
Yes, exactly. It's so true, multi-layered. And even when somebody is not traumatized, maybe it is a genuine fact of, well, this family could not have children and they really do want to give this child a loving home. There are situations like that for sure. But what I'm seeing, they're way in the minority. Okay, and those kids also, I've seen a lot of them have issues because often the parents haven't told them, or they've told them too early, or they've told them too late, you know. But the kids have always had questions, and they always want to go back to find their true parents. They want to know where their roots come from. They want to know about their DNA. They want to see pictures of their mother. They want to see pictures of their father. And when they've gotten into trouble, when they're like from their their adoptive parents, they would fantasize about being with their real parents, no matter how happy the home was. Obviously, a child is always going to have some kind of an issue, and maybe my parents this and maybe that, and you know, it's crazy. It's crazy when you look into this, because at the end of the day, every child should be with their natural parents. And of course, yes, there are those traumatic situations. If parents have died or what have you, yes, then by all means, let's go to a beautiful home with an adopted, with adopted parents. But
Shane's last comment is very telling.
Yeah, exactly. That's so true. Because it's not your natural family. And it's almost like living with strangers. Absolutely. I'm going to say I agree with that. It's like living with strangers.
But we are living with strangers. And unfortunately, the way that adoption was sold to the adoptive parents was, you know, here, take this lovely baby. You know, they were encouraged not even to tell the baby that they were adopted. You know, just it's your baby, and the mother is never, ever going to see it. The records are sealed. The mother will never find you, you know, and everything. So there was complete shutdown at every level on the truth of your identity. And even though we will love our adoptive parents, you're right, Chantelle, that we will question, we will want to know. We know we're different. We know. And the sad thing is that through the fear of the adoptive parents and the lack of education and support around keeping everything transparent and honest, the minute that an adoptee went to speak about how they felt, not in really a negative way, but just wanted to share and be, say how I feel being adopted, it was shut down at every point because the adoptive parents felt threatened and fear at that child speaking up. The saddest thing that I feel that happens today to adopted people, which I feel is quite alarming, and it happens frequently, and it happened recently when I mentioned about being adopted, when I was talking and I saw a comment. What happens, adoptees have been forced into an extremely painful silence the majority of their life, and they might not start to speak up until their adoptive parents die and they start searching or start talking about the reality of how they felt being adopted. And the minute they open their mouth, you've got somebody near them, close to them, and it could be a sibling, it could be an aunt or an uncle, someone to school with, a politician, somebody on a chat thing like this that goes, just shuts them down at every point about, you should be grateful, or, makes them feel completely nullified again by making statements that don't validate how they feel. Instead of saying, well, tell me more, I don't understand, tell me more, it's, no, I have a child who's adopted, they're happy, or I've got a husband who's adopted, don't be silly, they're happy, right? And
that's gaslighting in my mind.
Immediately when that's said, the adoptee who has finally found the courage to say something, no matter how small, is shut that down again.
Yeah, exactly. And how often do you find the adopted children, feeling guilty, and having to really? I've come across this so many times. The adopted kids if they dare to try and find their parents, or their parents happen to find them, or they want to find them, or something like that, they have to, like, really, the majority of times, go to the adopted parents and pacify them and say, you stole my mother, you stole my father, you'll always be my mother, but you know, this. There's so much guilt around that. And then, of course, the threat, the adoptive parents often feel so threatened that they're going to lose these kids. Right, and that is often, that in itself is a big rigmarole, especially if it's been kept from the kids, right?
Well, that's why we had 2,000 adoptive parents sign vetoes on behalf of their son or daughter, and the son and daughter had no clue that their adoptive parents had done that there was a veto, you know, because they lived in abject fear that their child was going to reject them. So who were they taking care of? Them. Number one, them. They were supposed to adopt to give that child the best life they could, and yet they're denying that child its first fundamental right, human right, to know their true identity, to know who they are. So while their child is falling off the perch and, you know, like maybe drinking alcohol and suicidal, it's fine, they're my child. I'm not losing that child. They would rather see that child dead and drug addicted than make contact with the biological parents. Yeah. And to me, that's
and then it's
scary.
often put down to bad genes. Bad genes. You don't know who you're adopting because, you know, you never know who the parents were. They could have been murderers or drug addicts, and now the child is going to have the same thing. We hear that a lot.
Well, I've had that. I've had adoptive parents say, "Oh, nothing to do with them. Like I didn't do anything wrong. There must be the bad genes from the mother or the father." I've had them say it to my face. Right? Yeah. And I've had there's stories of adoptive parents suing the departments because the child ended up with a defect like schizophrenia. So they tried to sue the department that you gave me a defective child because they found out that either the mother or the father had schizophrenia. So now the child does, so they want their money back. They got ripped off. Mm-hmm. Those things have happened.
You're kidding me. You're freaking kidding me.
I'm not.
That actually exists?
Yes.
Those court cases actually exist?
Yes. Here's the kicker. Like, if my adoptive parents could have got rid of me at any time and said, "Nah, don't like the kid, just send her back to," Shane's financial control. Could have sent me back at any time, and no real questions would have been asked, and I would have been just thrown in an orphanage, maybe re-adopted out. But nobody wanted toddlers; they wanted babies. So. When I went to the department, about 7 years ago, it would have been 7 years ago, because we were in a stakeholder meeting and we were talking about the Adoption Act because it was coming up for review. And I said, what does an adoptee need to do to become unadopted? And it's called discharge of their adoption. So the department didn't really know. They had to go away and find out for me and come back. And that's when they dropped the bombshell on me and told me that I'd have to apply to the Supreme Court to get out of my adoption. And I found out that by going through the lawyers, it could cost anything over $40,000. Then they would subpoena my adoptive parents to appear in court, and the judge would ask them if they approved of me becoming unadopted. Didn't matter that I was, at the time, 50 years old, an adult and a grandmother. Yeah. And then they said they would subpoena my biological mother to ask her, did she approve? They didn't ask her opinion in the first place when they took me, but apparently they'd ask her.
And now they're going to do it.
So I was horrified. I couldn't believe that this was what I have to go through. It doesn't matter that I had my whole childhood destroyed, even like being abused as an adult by these people. But apparently, this is what I had to do to get out of this adoption. Mm. But they could have just, as a child, just turned up at family services and said, here, take her back. and they would have offered them another one. Oh, we'll give you a more suitable child.
Let's just go look in the room quickly.
Yeah.
Since Shane's last comment, what's it worth to me missing out on 44 years of his life?
Oh, I know. 44 million.
Exactly.
Might as well. Mm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, ladies, I think we're gonna wrap it up for today. But Leslie, I would love to have you and Shane on again. So look forward to that as well. But very interesting conversations, and please, guys, share this information. Share it far, share it wide, because this is I say this a lot, you know. This is how it begins. This is how the trauma begins, and it's so there's so much more of this than what we know. You know, all we have to do is look actually at the whole Luciferian system and how many adoptions are in there as well. You know, we're looking at these, what we call also the hierarchy kids. The majority of them are probably birthed by a surrogate as well, which still is the same thing to me as an adoption. Doesn't matter whatever, it's still, you know, and a lot of these pregnancies are and have been fake. A lot of these kids have been inverted and transgendered at a very young age already. It's just sick. So this whole adoption system needs to be exposed. That's for sure. It really does need to be exposed, and the more of us who are aware of it, and it's and Shane, it's true what you were saying earlier on. You know, it's those who have not been adopted and haven't come from the adoption experience. Actually, majority of us, and I put myself in that bracket, have no idea what it's about. And that's why these conversations, we need to have them. We definitely need to have them because they are so important. I know Caleb was in the chat earlier on. I don't think he's here anymore. But it's like as well, his mother was pregnant with twins, and she aborted his brother, thinking that she was having a full abortion, not realizing that he was still there, you know. And then, of course, he was given up for adoption at the age of 2. Also, no love, no affection, no nothing. And the trauma that a child goes through in these situations, I mean, it's beyond what we can ever begin to comprehend. So we really do need to be having these conversations, and lots of them as well. So
Chantelle,
I don't know if
thank you for letting us use your platform to talk about
it's such a pleasure. Honestly, it is such a pleasure. And I hope that, you know, that these conversations grow more and more people get to be aware of what this is about, because it does need to be spoken about. I can't stress that enough times. This is where the true trauma begins. It's in the womb. It's from baby time. And what happens thereafter is just either covered up mostly or avoided emotionally, or the trauma just continues more and more.
Definitely. Most definitely. So if Shane's still there, I'm going to, Shane, are you coming on with your mother? Can I please see a yes in writing? I'm going to hold you to that, mate.
We want it in writing, Shane.
And it looks like Caleb may not be there, but I noticed he had a bit of a giggle when I said that we changed the ministers as often as we changed bras. I noticed he did have a little chuckle over that one.
Shane has given us a yes in writing. So we will be having you as.
I'm taking a photo of that, mate.
Exactly.
I'm holding it to it,
we will have you on soon to talk about these things. Absolutely. And as I thank you, Janine. Earn your shit. Don't sling it at others. You're right about that. Is there anything, Leslie, you'd like to say just before we wrap up for today? Because I know we're going to have you back again soon. And
Yeah,
obviously,
I'll have
KERRI.
my chance for everything else.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And you, KERRI, anything you want to just say before we wrap up for
I
today?
just want to thank everybody that's commented and for the support over the time frame that I've been talking about adoption on your channel. It's really great that people support our voices, and it's very imperative to our healing. And even though there are adoptees that feel that they can't come on and speak openly on a YouTube channel, they fully support what we do and thank us very much for being a voice for them. So we just want to thank you. And they see the comments that people make, and that's so important to them. Yeah.
I so agree with that. I so agree with that. Just the you know what I love is just the fact that it's coming out to the open, and I'm going to put it out there. I've put this invitation out there several times before. If there's any one of you guys that are watching this that are adopted, or you've been in a process, you've been a mother of forced adoption, or a child, whatever, or a husband, a man, right, who's gone through this, and you would be happy to chat to us, I would welcome you on this show. We really would welcome you. I think the more people start speaking, it's like, the survivors and overcomers. The more people who start speaking, the less this horrible energy loses its grip on everyone.
Yes.
So the more of us who speak and share stories, it gives others permission to do the same. And you know what? We'll carry on regardless. Soon they're going to start popping up like little flowers, and we'll have a grip on this for sure. Great, everybody. Thank you so much. I always appreciate you guys in the chat and in the comments, and we really appreciate you joining us for today's show. God bless you all, and have a fantastic week, and look forward to seeing you on the rest of the show. This show's this week. And until then, take care of yourselves, and I wish you all the health, wealth, and more abundance than what you could ever imagine. Take care, everybody. Cherry buys.
Thank you, Chantelle. Bye, KERRI.
Yeah. Hey.